yeah, I'll just do quick intros and then we can get started. So hello everyone. My name is Ben Tickler. So I work for Silicon Valley Bank. And so very quickly, what is Silicon Valley Bank? So I imagine you all have bank accounts. I bank with sort of some old-fashioned high street banks like NatWest, Santander, but there's people now like Monzo, Starling, Atom Bank you may have heard of. And we are exactly the same. We're a bank just like that, but we only bank companies. So we don't bank individuals like myself or you. And we only bank companies in what we call the innovation space. So these are really fast growing, high growth companies, which we'll explain more about later on. I'm called a director, but really what I do is I look after clients. So I am client facing. So if you had a company and you wanted somewhere to bank with, you would bank with us and I would look after you and hopefully do a good job of that. So I'll be one of the presenters today and really want to stress what Tony said. Please ask questions. I appreciate asking out loud. I don't often feel comfortable with that, but just put something in chat and we'll pick it up. And I can guarantee everyone else will be thinking what you're thinking. So yeah, that's a quick intro from me and I'll hand over to Guy and then Ellie to say hello as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Guy. So I also work at SVB. I'm on the ADP program, which is essentially like a grad scheme training program. Because I've only been at the bank since September, so I'm still quite new. So if you do have any questions, it's possible that you might be answering some for me as well. So I appreciate it. As I said, I only graduated last year, so I graduated from University of Lincoln in economics. Just think probably good to mention that in case anyone has any questions about that more broadly in terms of university or anything like that, then I'm sure we'll have time to answer those. It wasn't too long ago I was doing my personal statements and applications and stuff, so more than happy to answer those questions, so just let me know. But yeah, obviously you all.
Cool. And then I'm Ellie. I also started on the graduate scheme, so that was probably about 4 years ago now. I actually did biochemistry at uni, so not the traditional kind of finance background, just kind of ended up in SVB just because it's such a great culture, a really interesting company. As Ben said, we support innovation companies. So I specifically look at the kind of consumer companies, so, e-commerce, and then I also look at life science and healthcare companies, including kind of, the companies that develop the COVID vaccines, that sort of thing. And then my role more specifically at Silicon Valley Bank is focused on credit. So as Ben said, we're a bank that lends to companies as opposed to individuals. And if you think of kind of, you might have heard of, debt, so like a mortgage, for example, where, the bank will give you some money and then you have to repay it over a certain period of time. We do the same thing with companies. So they'll come to us and, ask for a chunk of money and we can loan it to them and then they repay it back to us over the next kind of 3 or 4 years. So my role is kind of assessing those companies, looking into them, see what they do, and see if we can help them.
Thanks, Ellie. And I would say, so this slide we're probably going to refer to a lot, and there'll be lots of things here that are just, crazy made up words. And before I joined at Silicon Valley Bank, I had 10 years banking experience, which I know, probably makes me sound quite boring, but a lot of these I didn't understand then. So we will refer back to these, but I think Guy's just going to give a very quick overview. Hope maybe some of it sticks. And then if you hear these words throughout the presentation, you can start to pull things together. But as I say, lots of room for pausing, lots of questions, and we will keep coming back to these to hopefully help you and us better understand some of the things we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. Yeah, as Ben said, there are a lot of jargon, a lot of terms that are used, I think, in any industry, but I feel like especially at banking, so it's good to try and get this out of the way first. So just to get everyone on the same page, then we'll start off with the term shares. So this is referring to shares in a company. Just for ease, this literally just means a piece of a company. So you can take a share in anything in terms of that. You could take a share of a pie, you could take a share of cake, you could take a share of a company as well. And you would essentially, if you were to buy shares in a company, that would give you some entitlements to some of the profits and ownership of the company as well. So if we refer to shares, just think of it as a piece of a company. Following on from that then, valuation in the simplest term, just basically means what is the company worth. I tend to think of it as if you were to, as an individual, pay for an entire company, how much would that cost you? That is a little bit of a simplistic way to look at it, but it's not too far away from the truth. The most successful companies, so you'll see that Amazon's valuation at the moment is close to $1 trillion, which is just an incomprehensible amount of money, to be honest. But that gives you some sense as to how successful these companies are. And it gives you some sense as if you were to buy all of those shares in Amazon, it would cost you around $1 trillion. I hope you guys are all saving because it's going to take you a while to get to that point. Next one, public and private. This one's a little bit more complicated to explain, so Ben, Nelly, if you want to jump in afterwards in any more detail, feel free. But if you are a public company, that essentially just means that anybody can buy shares or pieces of that company. So me and you could go on an app tomorrow and buy shares in some of the bigger companies like Deliveroo, like Amazon, and then we would be entitled to some of the profits in what's called a dividend. Because the companies essentially have an unlimited number of people that can provide investment into them, they tend to be a lot bigger than private companies. And then just leading into that, private companies are essentially the opposite. So not everyone can invest into them. They are majority ownership is normally with the founders of the company, and then maybe a few other key investors, but not everyone can buy shares in those. So I can't just go to my local barbers or chicken shop and ask to buy shares in their business because they're private companies. That's just not how that works, unfortunately. And then following on from that one, there is the IPO. So in a simplistic form, that's essentially how a company will transition between a private to a public. And it stands for initial public offering. So in that sense, it's just that first opportunity for people to buy shares in that public company. A company is essentially hoping that enough people are wanting to buy shares in the company that their value increases a lot because the price increases as more people try and buy shares into their company. It's obviously a big opportunity for the company to raise a lot of money. So it tends to be a very important factor for a company. And also because everyday individuals are buying into that company, they have to pass a series of checks and tests just to make sure they're suitable enough to be actually a public company, and then to list on the stock exchange, which is how you buy shares. Exit obviously is a very generic term, but in this scenario, we're specifically talking about companies exiting, which essentially just means founders or investors trying to get rid of their stake in the company, and then hopefully turn quite a big profit from their original investment in that company. So this can be done normally through merger and acquisition, which just means another founder or another wealthy individual or company comes and buys your company from you for a lot more than you put into it originally. And so you walk away, happy days, big profit, and that's it, that's the end. Or it can be an IPO. So back to the definition before, where you try and sell your company, you sell shares in your company on the stock exchange, and then you turn a profit from that as unlimited number of people start investing into your company. So that's what an exit means, just a founder or investor just getting rid of their stake of the company, and hopefully for a profit, but obviously not always. And then lastly, investors. And so this will just be an individual firm who is paid into a company because they see future value in their investment. I don't know if it's overcomplicate things, but I tend to explain it to people as if you are an individual and you want to go get a job, but you have no way of getting to the job, so your parents buy you a bike. You've been given that investment in you, that bike, and as a result, when you get your job, you can then return that investment by paying rent or taking them out for dinner or something, and that's you returning that investment. And in that scenario, the parents would be the investors in you. So that's how I tend to think of investors. I think it's always easier just to sort of bring things down to an individual level. But those are some of the few definitions we picked out that will definitely come up in the presentation. There are a few others, but we'll probably just go through that at the as we go. And also, if we say anything which you haven't recognised before and you don't know, just chuck it into the chat, and we'll get to answering that as well. Before I just pause there for any questions on those, I just want to check if Ben and Ellie want to add anything to any of those I've said.
Hey Guy, I think there's actually been a couple of questions already. So yeah, we could, unless Ellie's got something specific, we could just jump into the questions.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, let's go for the questions.
So the first question we've got, and I was actually going to start suggesting some things to watch. So, you know, there's some interesting films on, and they're generally, you know, sort of fictional films on what happened in the stock market crash, like The Big Short. But there's, you know, loads of videos you can go on YouTube, etc. But I think in terms of shares, so I think it would be interesting. So Tony's asked, how would a student who is interested in finance get a knowledge of stocks and shares so they could invest? And I think this is a really, really good question. And certainly, you know, I'm showing my age now, but when I grew up and was at school, there wasn't any sort of financial education. Yes, I went and studied economics, etc. But, you know, really growing up, the basics weren't covered. And I generally think now stocks and shares are becoming part of the basics. So to keep it very simple, when you save money, there is a product available called a cash ISA, which means you can save money within, you know, and not pay tax on it up to a certain limit. And there's now the equivalent for stocks and shares as well. And as Guy said, this is essentially where, and there's different ways of doing it. You can own a stock in a company, a part of that company, a tiny slice of the pie or cake. And if the valuation goes up, which Richard Treadwell has commented on, so if after this you Google a company called Wise, they used to be called TransferWise, they went, so to use somebody's jargon, they went public. They did an IPO yesterday on the London. So they're now a public company. So if you had stocks or shares in the company through this product I talked about as an example, you know, you would have done quite well out of it. So I would say, Tony, there's lots of stuff online. I think just starting to look into the basics around a stocks and shares ISA is a good start. And then there's platforms that make it really slick now, far slicker than any traditional high street bank could, to trade stocks and shares. So, you know, people like Nutmeg, who actually have been acquired now by a big US bank, but that's a platform in the UK you can use. In the US, they have a version called Robinhood, who have been in the news a lot recently. It's an interesting name, and they've been in the news a lot. So Google that and you'll see. And they've announced they're also going to do what we call an IPO, so go public like Wise did. So loads of great information out there. For fun, though, I would watch some of the films out there like Wall Street and The Big Short and stuff. You know, I think they're great, and I still learn interesting snippets. And clearly, way before probably a lot of the audience's time, but, you know, there was a certain thing that happened in 2007 at 2008 that sort of getting involved in shares makes it very interesting. And then the second question, and I'm almost certain Guy and Ellie will know more than me, but at the very heart of it, what is Bitcoin? That's another question that Tony's asked. I mean, in my view, it's basically a virtual currency. So think of cash, but it's completely in the digital world. And Bitcoin's actually only one of them. So I think Bitcoin is worth something like one Bitcoin is worth like 23,000 sterling, so GBP pounds today. And it's basically a modern currency that is building purely digital. So there's no, you know, you don't hand over cash or cards or anything. And it's generating a lot of interest. So again, things to look out for is the country of Singapore talked about how important Bitcoin could be for them going forward. Elon Musk, who is behind Tesla, the electric cars, has commented a lot about Bitcoin, and you've seen the valuation go up and down. But I'm not the expert on Bitcoin, but that's my high level. Guy, Ellie, I don't know if you've got any other comments.
No, I was just going to say.
Okay, great.
I was just going to say, I think your description of Bitcoin is pretty spot on. I think just on the first point, though, I would just put a word of caution for especially sort of younger people trying to get interested in stocks and shares. Is just to be really cautious of people on Instagram who are supposedly experts in trading, because I follow a few, and there are quite a few posts, and at the end of the day, a lot of the time it is your own money. So do try and treat it as a risk, and just be a little bit cautious of following Instagrammers or anyone like that who's trying to recommend you how to get rich in a few hours, because normally it is too good to be true. So that's some of the least traditional ways of learning about stocks and shares, and I just wanted to highlight as a bit of caution. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say, I think Ben's description of Bitcoin is pretty spot on, and I know there are just so many new ones coming out. I don't know if any of you have heard of like Dogecoin, which basically was a bit of a joke. So there are kind of ones out there that you probably don't want to put all of your money behind, just given they're very influenced by kind of people in the media. For example, Elon Musk, they kind of have the ability to kind of comment on social media platforms and kind of bring up that value way beyond where it should be. Yeah, just like Guy said, tread with caution, do some research if you're interested, but, maybe start off small, just for a bit of fun.
Right. And yeah, I just put in the chat. I mean, the best things, as I said, I didn't necessarily have access to financial education in terms of some of these points when I was younger. So just talking to family and friends, and I think some of the most basic things, what stepping back from shares, just getting into the culture of putting aside some money every month, when you have jobs, etc., and just the basics. And then from there, absolutely over time, if you think I've got too much in cash, you can then start to talk to your network about, what other areas could look like. So, actually, there's some more questions coming on here. So, Guy, I think you might have, before we go on to what is a unicorn, so I think a question of is being recorded. Yes, it is being recorded, my understanding is. And what companies could be blue chip companies? So, Guy, I don't know, I think you might have referenced the sort of term blue chip. Like what do you mean by that? And just a couple of sort of quick examples, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so a blue chip company is essentially a well-known, well-established company. Yeah, apologies if I did reference it. Japanese jargon almost straight away. But some of the examples of blue chip companies would be like Coca-Cola, Boeing, just these really well-known brands, like very well-established. Those would be considered blue chip. From a banking perspective, obviously, we probably see it as quite a positive thing to be a blue chip company, just because it just shows a lot of established like good trading for multiple period of time, and also normally which suggests like quite big size as well, so quite low risk from that sense. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, really good question. Thanks, Jack. And yeah, often when I'm working with my clients, we'll look at who they're selling their product or solution to, and if they're selling to a blue chip company, that's clearly a really positive sign, right? Because they're selling to a well-established, financially stable company that obviously likes their product and will have lots and lots of people that need to sign off on a new contract, etc. So it's obviously a big sign. Okay, should we move on to the next slide if everyone's ready? So what is a unicorn? I was very aware in the title, we use this term unicorn, which certainly, I've got a young daughter and sort of so many things are branded with a unicorn now, stationery and clothing, etc. But what on earth do we mean within the technology world? And essentially, all a unicorn is, and it's a term primarily used in technology, and it's where there's a private valuation of $1 billion plus. So what do I mean by that? Let's go back to Guy's jargon. So if there was 1 billion shares in the company, it's a basic example, and each of those shares were worth $1, then the company would be worth $1 billion. So we'll come on to explain some more concepts later on, but basically you're looking at the share price, number of shares, and that will give you the valuation of the company. And so this term unicorn, you might see it in the press. And we've picked some well-known companies here. I think globally there's something like 523 unicorns. There were 76 last year. And I think with COVID and with everyone working remotely, and look, here we are on Microsoft Teams, and I think this was Tony's team link, but we use Microsoft Teams at Silicon Valley Bank. We also use Zoom. We weren't really using these solutions 18 months ago, 2 years ago. So the speed of innovation and embracing companies has led to these unicorns, being formed at an increasingly growing rate. And we picked some well-known ones here. So just think about throughout your life, it's how do people cook and order food now and buy food, and people like Deliveroo or Just Eat have made it a lot easier, and that's absolutely an example of a unicorn. So as I say, a unicorn was 1 billion valuation. I think Deliveroo, when they went public last year or earlier this year, was something like 7 billion. So they're sort of a unicorn 7 times over. I've put Cazoo. Now you might not know this company. I mean, ultimately it's a new online way of buying a car, but they've put a lot of money in, and they're also a unicorn into sponsoring Premier League teams, sponsoring the snooker, rugby league. So you may well see that name everywhere. And then right at the start, when I tried to explain, maybe not in the best way, but about what like Silicon Valley Bank is a commercial bank. Some of you might have a card. They call it the Coral card, I think, from Monzo. And so again, it's a bank for consumers, unlike Silicon Valley Bank in the UK, which, as I say, was for companies, but is another example of a company that has a valuation of $1 billion over. And really, this is just showing all different sectors being innovated. If you think about where you stay now, if you're lucky enough to have done some traveling or go on holiday, Airbnb you might have stayed in, as opposed to a sort of traditional cottage or hotel. Airbnb is another very big example of a unicorn. So I don't know if anyone wants to either chuck into the chat. I don't know if you've got, if anyone comes up with any examples of what they think might be a unicorn. As I say, it's typically companies in the technology space with a valuation of over $1 billion, and you'll be surprised. So I got an Uber yesterday, a taxi through Uber. Uber, another example of a very big company. But yeah, Ellie, Guy, I don't know if you've got any other examples you want to talk through.
I will talk through one in a couple of slides time, but yeah, we'll be talking about Depop. So they're like an online secondhand clothes reselling app, and they actually went public last month now. Their valuation was $1.6 billion. So yeah, we'll have a kind of a more in-depth look at that one in a couple of slides time, but that's another good example.
Yeah, I think that kind of feeds into my next slide, to be fair. So.
Right, and Tony, was it Tony who asked another question? Yeah, I think Tony's been well prepped. This is good. What is the next big unicorn, do you think? And again, as I said, if you read that question and you weren't on this call, you'd think, what are they talking about? But just to remind you, unicorn is this company that's valued at $1 billion plus. I would actually say I don't think they're there yet, but so if anyone orders flowers, there's a company called Bloom and Wild. You can do it through the post now. So again, everything really has become, a subscription as a service. So what does that mean? If you think you can now order razors to shave through the post, you can order eco-friendly toothpaste through the post, and it's all this. I get coffee pods through the post. So it's all this. You pay £10 a month and you'll get access to this product through the post. And that is a technology company. Appreciate it's sort of on the verges, but Bloom and Wild is a company that does that for flowers. And so actually, I think I found the link, but I'll put a link in when I find it. But there's an article, I think, a couple of months ago predicting the next top 15 unicorns. So I'll share that in a minute, and then you can all track and see, to answer Tony's question, who becomes the next one. But yeah, unless anyone's got any other comments, we happy to move on to the next slide.
Just going to say, I think ByteDance, which the parent company of TikTok, they've been muttering about going public soon, or maybe this year. I'm not sure. I haven't actually looked into that properly, but I would assume, given how well social media has done in the past when they go public, there is potential there for a unicorn. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of TikTok, so we'll see. Okay, so I casually managed to mention social media previously then. So I'm going to bring another example in terms of how a company actually grows from just an idea to a unicorn status. And I'm hoping that we've picked an example which most people on the call will recognize, just from that logo alone, really. So this is Snapchat, or Snap. And this is sort of how they managed to get themselves to a unicorn status relatively recently, a few years ago. I think they went public in 2017. So typically a company will start with an idea which they're hoping will solve a problem. So pretty much every startup or every new business is either trying to solve a problem or fill a space in the market that already exists. And in that sense, what was the problem that Snapchat was solving? Well, they were trying to solve this idea that not everybody wants their social media presence to be haunting them in the future or to be accessible in years to come. So I probably should describe how Snapchat's changed, because in the few years that it's been around, it's changed a lot. And showing my great age now, I can actually describe how Snapchat was at the beginning, because it is quite different to now. But originally, you weren't able to save photos down from memories. You weren't able to send anything for more than 30 seconds. That was the limit. You weren't able to send videos, you weren't able to chat, you had to just use the photos, and your captions were like 140 characters, I think. It's like similar to Twitter. So all of these things essentially meant that it made it very, very difficult for anyone who was receiving snaps to actually keep them and then share them afterwards or anything like that. So that was sort of how Snapchat really originated. And the reason I'm trying to describe how it was back then is because that was the problem they were trying to solve, was the idea that you don't want to have all your embarrassing photos of you putting like silly faces or anything out there all the time, going around the school. You want them deleted ASAP, but you still want to be able to get the benefits of social media, which was obviously the socializing, the talking to a bunch of people and stuff like that. So that's what they were trying to solve. And they came up with this idea in 2011. And when I say they, I mean the two founders from Stanford University and then the coder. I'm going to mention the coder Reggie Brown by name because he actually got forced out of the company a year later. And I just think that's a bit harsh. So I'm just going to call him out, give him a reference because poor guy, seen a unicorn company that he's no longer part of. So they founded it in 2011. And then, to be honest, they didn't really have, the next stage for most companies is then to start thinking about how they're going to sell their products, how they're going to get it out there, and also how they're going to get their money from it as well. Fortunately, Snapchat didn't really have to work too hard on the selling front. Within a few years, they had over 15 million snaps being sent a day, which I think just shows how the market was ready for something like Snapchat. And they were just I think everybody was just very excited by it, and it took off extremely fast. So the idea of selling it to people kind of didn't really have to be much of an issue for them, much of a sticking point. And then in terms of how they actually get their money back, just like any other social media, the main revenue comes from advertising. So especially once they got to that size, they were able to sell quite lucrative advertising options. And I saw that in 2020, they made 2.5 billion in revenue, and 99% of that was through advertising alone. So it just sort of shows the extent to which advertisers and companies really value social media in terms of getting their own products out there. So that was kind of the early stages in terms of how they're trying to get their products created, problem they're trying to solve. Once they've done that, the next issue is the fact that a company will have a lot of costs. So they have employees that they need to pay for, they'll have rent on buildings they need to pay for, all sorts of development costs, coding costs. They've got loads of things that they actually need to pay for. But if you can look at the revenue graph on that chart, they don't actually start making any money until 2015, and they've already started their product in 2011. So they've got 4 years of not making any money but spending a lot to try and actually develop the product. And this is where investors come in. So we've got another slide on investors, more specifically breaking it down a bit more. But investors essentially are firms or individuals who are wanting to put money in to keep the product alive because they know in the future there is value in what's going on. And as you can see from the revenue graph, they weren't wrong. Again, because of the success Snapchat was having in such an early fashion in just a few years' time, they didn't struggle too hard with getting investment. Altogether, they made just over $700 million in investment to get their products to where it is now. Which again just sort of shows the size and the amount of money in this market. Social media especially was really hot this time. So a lot of money for them to create some photos sharing apps. So not too bad. Once you've created all this investment and then you've sort of matured, if you look at that sort of flow chart, you've got into the established expansion area. This is when you need to start thinking about exiting. Snapchat, instead of going for a merger or acquisition, went for an IPO option. The thing about IPOs is you need to prove to everyday people that your company has value in the future as well, because people are expecting to put their investment in today and then in a few years' time it'd be worth a lot more and get their returns higher. And this is where you start to see a lot of the bigger changes. So this is around 2017. And this is where Snapchat started to really force people to use Snapchat on a more regular basis and for a longer period of time. So they brought in a bunch of changes leading up to their IPO. So they introduced the streaks, which obviously I think a lot of people in the chat will be familiar with, but it's essentially just every day you spoke to somebody, it would keep a count, and then you can just see how high you can keep your number at. It just ends up with people sending random photos of like streaks, no relevance. So they did that to try and encourage investors to show how people wanted to keep hold of their app and wanted to keep using their app. They also included a chat function, so now people could just message without having to send photos, so it's more convenient for them. They introduced the Snap Maps, which is was quite surreal at the time. But they introduced loads, the geo filters on your face, stuff like this. All of this was like quite new in comparison to the timescale of the company. And it just sort of showed how they really invested in their own app to try and get it to a position where people could really believe that it was an app that was going to stick around. It wasn't just here for a few years. And I think everyone on the chat would agree now it's so well established. I'm sure a lot of people use it people just use it just as their main method of talking to people, which is quite impressive given that wasn't its aim to begin with. So having then developed the product quite a bit to the place where it was ready to go onto the public, they listed in 2017, and I think their original valuation was 16 billion, but it was so popular throughout the day of their IPO. The valuation actually rose by like 44%. So it ended with a valuation of about 33 billion, which, given it has two founders at that point, is not half bad, I think you'd say. And again, just to sort of stress, that just essentially means that if you were to try and buy every single share in Snapchat, it costs you $33 billion, which is pretty crazy. I think one point to mention on this as well is it sort of showed how excited everyone was about social media. So before that, the previous company to go public in social media was Twitter. So this was the first one in a while. And I think there was just a lot of excitement around it. And to raise 44% in 1 day is quite impressive. And to get to a valuation of 33 billion from an app, which is essentially just sending photos to each other, is quite extortionate, quite amazing. So so that's kind of the story of Snapchat. You go from a seed idea that you're thinking of solving a problem, we think is filling a space in the market, and then you continue to get investment into that through other investors. You go through those growth stages, and then when you start thinking of exiting, you can then exit through an IPO, but then you can raise a lot of money through individual investors. So that's just sort of the story of Snapchat, and that's just a very simple and quite quick storyline in terms of how a company can go from seed to unicorn. Unfortunately, they're not all that easy, they're not all successful, and they're also not all that fast as well. But it's a very good success story and it's pretty interesting. I'm not sure if Ellie and Ben wants to add anything to that slide before we jump into some of those questions.
Nope.
Cool.
Wow, what a question that is. Sorry, Guy, good job. I'm just reading the questions in the chat. So just quickly on Tony's question, I think we have our final slide is a bit around Silicon Valley Bank. So I'll cover that one there. If I don't, remind me. But yeah, no, we've had a phenomenal question. So what would you suggest these days, a virtual company and investment, or a real life company? Which one is more likely to become a unicorn? So we could probably spend a lot of time talking about this. Now, I think if I'm reading this right, I think, so maybe if we just spit out the virtual company in real life, I think there's lots of traditional businesses, operating in very traditional industries, be it the, I don't know, aviation and planes or automotive, cars industry. I just caveat this. So we're talking today about the technology industry. So a lot of this is your actual product isn't necessarily physical. I know Ellie works with some, but typically a sort of a software company or some of these, it's technology, it's code, it's something that's been created and then is sold sort of through the cloud. And I think the virtual piece is fascinating because what we've seen over the last 18, 24 months is many of the clients I work with no longer just have a main hub. Absolutely that they'll be in certain countries, but they've got so used to now like recruiting and bringing on new people, new talent remotely. So people that are based all over the world. So the whole sort of global talent market has really been opened up because look, here we are interacting on Teams and Zoom, and we haven't been able to travel. And let's be honest, it's easier to recruit. You don't have to physically move your family or move somewhere else. So I do think going forward, lots of the next unicorns, lots of the future high growth companies are going to be the ones that tap into a global talent base. as much as I want to say it, not all the best talent is in London or in one hub. It's all over the world. And so a company that maybe you could Google after this is a company called Hopin. They've seen incredible growth. I'm not expecting you to have heard of them, and they sell to businesses, but they're an online event platform. So no one could travel, no one could go to events and network like they used to, and they provided a platform to be able to run events virtually. But what's made them so successful is they're a remote first company. They're a virtual company. Their staff are based all over the world. They don't really have traditional offices, and I'm sat in an SVB office now. So I wouldn't say either way. I think there's lots of, there'll be lots of future unicorns in all industries. But as I say, I think those ones that those sort of virtual companies or ones where people can remotely get together like this, based all over the world, because what makes a unicorn successful? It's a big part of it is it's people, right? So having the best people working for that company. So hopefully that's kind of answered your question. But Ellie, Guy, or Richard, or Tony, I'd love to hear your views as well.
Yeah, I think maybe sometimes working with SVB, you kind of only focus on the tech side of things. So I'm not as well in tune into what the next sort of brick and mortar kind of real life unicorns look like. But I think from our perspective, I'd definitely say that looks like your best chances of success, like you said, is being virtual, being able to create products anywhere in the world with the best people in the world. So I think in that sense, probably I'd agree with you. More on the virtual side.
Can I just add one thing to what Ben said? It's not even so much answering that question, but it's definitely with the use of technology now, social mobility, the very fact that young people have to leave their homes and their communities is not an issue anymore, because you can work for the best companies all over the world from your home. And I think that has been a definite plus side of this whole sort of pandemic.
That's a great point.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So if no other, and I really appreciate, honestly, some of these questions are super well, they're all brilliant. So thank you so much. Do you want to, should we go on to the next slide or?
Yeah, so I mentioned investors a few times in my slide, but I think we're just going to break that down a little bit more and just describe how investors actually work and what the actual process looks like in a dramatic form.
Dramatic, wow, that's an introduction. Okay, I'll try and be dramatic. So I think, yeah, so what we've talked about, and we'll come on to this, there's lots of different ways of growing a business, right? But a lot of your decisions, let's say you go and start a company, might be based around, how do you finance that company? And so often, people will have a great idea like Snapchat, they'll be solving a problem and they've got this huge market opportunity. They just simply don't have enough money to go and achieve what they want to achieve. And by that, I mean, hire the people they want to hire. We've just been talking about that. Invest in the product, move into new countries where they just know that everyone would love their product, but how do you do that? So a big part of what we see in technology is people going and raising money, taking on money. You might hear the word equity or capital, but ultimately it's just a way of getting more money into your business. So that's sort of that first picture. Now, maybe you have seen the show, maybe you haven't, but I still use this example when I'm talking to people who are 20, 30 years older than you, because I think it does a great job of just simplifying a lot of what we're talking about today. So recommend watching Dragon's Den. I think in the US it's a version called the Shark Tank, which is definitely 10 times as dramatic. But I do love Dragon's Den. I think Sunday night. And as an example, I will call out. So it was on this series, and it was a company called, I'll put this in the chat afterwards, Generate. So Generate. And this is a technology business, so in our space, and it's an advertising technology business. So it's all about, when you access websites, when you're online, what happens to your data. And they pitched, and really what Dragon's Den is someone goes up this lift, and they sit in front of these five investors who are very successful, wealthy business people, and they basically say, this is my business. This is what I do. This is the problem I'm solving. These are my clients. And then the big point of the pitch is at the end, asking for a portion of money. So with Generate, I think they asked for £60,000 for a 10% stake in the business. So just pausing there, going back to everything Guy said earlier, that essentially values his business. And he was a very impressive founder called Sam Jones at 600,000 because he wants 10% of the business, 60,000. And then it's about convincing the dragons. So in this episode, and it's on YouTube, I think it's about 8 or BBC iPlayer, I think it's 8 to 9 minutes long. At the end of the day, he gets investment. He gets offers from everyone, apart from a lady called Sarah Davies, which actually, you know, I think is also a really valuable point, because she says my expertise is not technology. And I think, you know, when we talk about raising money, when we talk about investing, when we talk about growing, talent is crucial, right? And so, you know, it's not just about the money. And Sarah stepped out saying, well, actually, I couldn't add as much value as some of the other dragons. And that's what they're called, right? It's why it's called Dragon's Den, because these 5 people are known as dragons. So a very successful story. And the sort of final piece is, as Guy said, what you're doing there as a founder, you've gone from owning 100% of the business. So it's all your business, all your idea. And in Sam Jones' example, Generate, he's now given up 10% to these dragons. But what that allows him to do is he's now got £60,000 in the business. He's now got 2 experienced dragons on his board, and we can talk about a board in more detail. But in his view, giving up that portion of his business, bringing these 2 people in, is going to allow him to achieve all those ambitions I talked about. But this isn't the only option, and we'll come back to it. But if you do want to go down this route, he's then now hoping, with their help, the company can grow even quicker, and he can hopefully get to unicorn status even quicker. So if you haven't watched it, go away. I think it does a way better job of any of us at sort of explaining the concept of raising money and investment. But yeah, Guy, Ellie, I don't know if you want to comment further on that slide.
No, I think it's just a good way to kind of picture, you know, what a company will kind of go through, the stages they'll go through. So kind of, you know, starting off building their product, kind of showing how they can kind of help either consumers or businesses, and then kind of pitching it to, you know, these investors. So in this case, it's individuals, but it can also be what we call venture capital firms, which are essentially kind of a whole pool of these wealthy individuals under one business, which then invests on their behalf. So that's kind of another way that companies can gain investment, is through these kind of businesses made up of loads of different individual wealthy investors. And they typically kind of just basically have a bit more money to go around, and you can get larger investments from those people. But yeah, I think Dragon's Den is a great way. It shows kind of the process and kind of what the whole point of, you know, companies trying to raise money is, and what they can achieve with that.
And I would just one other example to look out. I think on Shark Tank, which was the US version of Dragon's Den, you might have it. I've got it at home. Ring, it's called. So when someone rings the doorbell, there's a video as part of the doorbell, and it was a company called Ring, and they actually got turned down by Shark Tank. So again, watch that episode. And then Ring went on and were acquired by Amazon for north of well over $1 billion. So they're now a unicorn in their own right. So again, you know, different ways of scaling your business, and sometimes you'll get no's, but I think that was a good example that actually not you know your business better than ever, and it's all about getting the right investors in, not just getting money from anyone. Cool. Ellie, I think you were going to cover that case study you talked about next.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I was going to cover kind of a case study on Depop. Is another good example of a recent unicorn. So basically, I'll go through from kind of when they were founded. So they're actually a London-based startup. They were founded in 2011 by a founder called Simon Beckerman, sorry. And he was also a founder of this fashion magazine based in Italy called Pig, P-I-G. And he essentially wanted to create an application or a platform in which people who read this magazine can then also buy the products from the companies that are featured in the magazine. So imagine like you're flicking through like a Vogue or something, they list a bunch of products. And they wanted an easy way in which you could just kind of like look at the product from the magazine on this platform and buy it straight away, and they're all kind of in one place. And he found quite a lot of success within kind of the first year of launching, but then kind of quickly realized that in order to get to the next level, so kind of as Guy was saying with Snapchat, you need to show the future value to kind of everyone who's investing. So in order to show his future value to everyone else, he realized that he kind of needed other sellers to come in. So he needed a buyer side and a seller side to create kind of this marketplace platform. So I think the best way that Depop was described to me was if you imagine Instagram and eBay had a baby, it's kind of like that. So they aim not only to be just a selling platform, but they aim to be a social media platform. And their kind of whole ethos is primarily fashion based, ensuring that kind of everyone is able to have their sort of self-expression of like all different styles of fashion. And they're also focusing quite heavily on sustainability. So, you know, they sell used fashion primarily. And as you know, kind of buying secondhand goods is much better than buying kind of new goods. And they also do collaborations with brands, and they're ensuring that these brands have sustainability at their heart, and that they either are kind of a circular fashion brand or they have responsibly sourced materials. So, you know, this is kind of the ethos core to the company. So not only are they, you know, primarily kind of a sales platform with a social media aspect, but they kind of want to work all of those values into their company. And that's really important to a lot of their users. So I don't know about you guys, but for me personally, I'm quite focused on sustainability. I like to know that the things that I'm buying, you know, are fair to everyone. You know, then, you know, not harming the environment as much as they maybe previously have done. And I think especially, you know, for kind of younger users today, that's kind of front of mind and something that people kind of move their spending habits around based on. So Depop is like a really great example of this. So they originally, founded in 2011, after kind of 3 years of building their platform, they raised £8 million. So from investors, which, you know, we've mentioned about before, so kind of Dragon's Den style. They raised from a company called Balderton, which is a kind of UK based company. And this was in order to expand their platform. So they're initially launched in the UK and they wanted to expand it into the US. So the US market is, as you can imagine, a lot bigger than the UK. There's loads more people, has a massive economy. So that's kind of like the goal for Depop. So they use this £8 million to kind of build their product, build their users, and it got them to 5 million users worldwide. And they were selling about 500,000 items per month. But Depop didn't want to stop there. So they continued to raise and they put together another £8.25 million in September 2016. So only 5 years after they were initially founded. And that kind of allowed them to get all the way up to 8 million users. So another 3 million users. And they also were able to demonstrate kind of a massive revenue growth, I think 130% within the year. And this was primarily because they were able to move into the US. However, once they got there, they still didn't want to stop. So they kind of they're seeing this value and they want to kind of capitalize on it and continue to build the value. So what they do is they go out and they raise another £20 million in order to kind of broaden their US market and go into other geographies. And kind of another good thing about Depop, maybe in comparison to, like, I don't know if anyone's used eBay, but when you sell on eBay, you have to pay to kind of list your product on the platform. Depop, you don't have to do that. So you only pay a fee if you actually sell the product. So Depop take 10% cut of the revenue. So, you know, say you sell, you know, a handbag for like £10 on Depop, you would get £9 and Depop will get that £1. So that's how they make their money. So, you know, you're happy, you get 90% of the money that you make, and they get this 10%. So yeah, after they raised this £20 million round, they kind of continued to grow. They built their user base. They kind of refined their flat platform. I think before I mentioned this was kind of like an Instagram cross with eBay. So basically what they want to do is they want to kind of get you on the platform buying and selling, but they also want you to like continue returning to the platform multiple times a day. So I imagine, you know, many of you maybe have, you know, Instagram, TikTok, both, you know, Snapchat. I imagine you probably go on maybe more than once a day. So that's kind of their thinking, is they want to kind of build and, you know, build content that kind of draws people in, gets you continue checking it. So, you know, you can follow sellers if you like their fashion style, you can comment on items, you can kind of ask questions, and they want you to interact with each other. So that's kind of, how they're building on their success. So they're building kind of a social media platform linked to a marketplace where you can buy and sell those things. And they kind of realized as well over the last couple of years that there were kind of sellers popping up on the platform who were specializing in kind of hot items. So, vintage trainers, special items that, were coming into fashion. And they realized that people were setting up businesses from their bedroom, essentially, where they were buying these items and selling them on to kind of fashion enthusiasts. Which is another kind of a great way to draw people in. If you've got a fashion enthusiast, you can follow those sellers. They get to own some of those items. They can sell them back on. But they were also realizing that there were kind of these sellers who were making their living out of it. And I think they were saying that people can earn kind of up to $100,000 in a year, kind of just buying and selling goods on this platform. So some people are actually making their living out of doing this. So yeah, based on this success and kind of the rate of user uptake, in June of this year, they actually went public. No, not went public. They were acquired by Etsy. So I don't know if many of you have heard of Etsy, but it's a US-based kind of selling platform for kind of handmade goods. So you, as a seller, you can sell your kind of very niche product on the Etsy platform, and everyone can kind of look at it. And traditionally, I guess Etsy is probably used by kind of a slightly older generation. I'd say like my mom quite enjoys using Etsy. It's got kind of handmade goods and everything on there, so it kind of appeals to her. Good for birthday presents, I guess. But their kind of move to buy Depop was a very smart one, because Depop's user base is primarily under 26 years old. I think there's 90% of their platform, their users are under 26. So they're kind of buying in those customers in order to feed their kind of Etsy platform in the future. So it's a really smart move by them, and something that probably wasn't expected initially. But yeah, Depop definitely falls into the unicorn category, because its valuation at the time of acquisition by Etsy was $1.6 billion. So you can see kind of how, it started off 2011 by, a guy who founded a magazine and wanted to have the products from the magazine able to be bought by everyone, and has kind of evolved into this social media come marketplace that everyone can access. I think it's free to download from the App Store. Take a look. But yeah, that's a pretty, as Guy said, kind of Snapchat-esque. It's quite a condensed timeline. So it was only 10 years from kind of founding to acquisition by Etsy. And at the moment, they have about 30 million users over 150 countries. So they've got such a massive spread kind of across the globe. And I think it's such a good success story. So you guys should just check it out. It's pretty interesting. You can kind of look at the kind of Instagram style feed, and then also flip over to kind of buy or sell anything you would like. But yeah, I don't know if anyone has any questions.
I've just noticed we've about 5 minutes left. Is any other slides, Ellie, or?
I think that's maybe 2 more, and then one that's just a question slide.
Okay.
I can pick up the pace a bit. Yeah, so as we have mentioned, I guess primarily the equity option, so that kind of Dragon's Den way to finance your company, where you ask investors for money, they give you a portion, and then in return you give them a bit of your company. So that is what we refer to as equity. But there kind of are 3 main options in which you can finance your company. So the first being profits. That is essentially where, the example here we have is a chicken shop. So your kind of corner shop style company, what they will do is they will sell you, the fried chicken, but they sell it to you for much, much more than they actually buy the chicken and the ingredients for. So any money that they make on top of their costs is profit. And then they recycle some of those profits back into their company, obviously pay their staff wages, and that kind of continues on. And they can kind of use that money that they recycle back into the company for expansion. Maybe they'll open a second chicken shop, or they can pay it out to, their founders. So that's kind of maybe what you would kind of traditionally expect from, you know, like a supermarket chain or a corner shop, but can also happen for tech companies. Although I guess for tech companies, it traditionally takes a lot longer for them to get to this profitable state, which is why they rely on the debt and the equity initially. So the second option we haven't really touched much on, but this is debt. And this is basically, you know, a bank such as ourselves will lend the company an amount of money, and then they will be expected to repay that money over kind of maybe 3 to 10 years. And they will pay that, you know, based on the value that they expect to generate from that initial money. So say we give them, you know, £1 million, they will spend that £1 million in their business, making it better, creating more revenues, getting more kind of customers, and then they will pay that money back to us over the following 3 to 10 years. And they kind of would hope that that £1 million that they invested into their company is giving much, much more return. And that's how they pay us back. And I think we kind of probably already covered equity, but again, that's just investors coming in, giving them money, and in return, getting a share of their business. I think the last slide, we don't really have to touch too much on it, but this is more just about SVB. We kind of help businesses throughout this life stage. So kind of referring back to Guy's slide of Snapchat, you had that kind of evolution of that from the seed all the way to that mature tree. And we aim to help companies throughout this whole kind of cycle. So from them, you know, just starting out, we can help provide bank accounts, and then maybe they start growing a bit more. We can give them some, you know, credit cards, and then they grow even further. We can give them some debt. And then once they get to kind of this profitability, we can give them different types of debt. We can introduce them to investors so they can get equity. All of those good things. And yeah, as I just mentioned here, kind of networking and events. So introducing them to people that can help their business, giving them connections within the ecosystem. It's kind of all just, you know, things that we can help them to grow. And then, yeah, this little map here is just the locations of SVB. So as you can see, we cover quite a large part of the globe, you know, aiming to help those businesses expand globally, and hopefully, you know, all the way around the world.
Just a point, Ellie, move on to the last question and answer slide. I'm not entirely certain if we get kicked out at 11 o'clock, or maybe we can stay on for another few minutes because there's some questions we would like to ask.
Yeah, no worries.
And Tony, just quickly, you had a question earlier on, you know, is there a department looking out, working with small businesses, etc.? So yes, you know, that early stage team banks very early stage companies, but we also bank early stage investors who, back to the Dragon's Den example, back to Guy's slide, are investing at companies at a seed stage. So hopefully we're working with them, we're adding value at an early stage, and then like the students on this call, like you called out, you know, the company ends up growing and becoming the next unicorn. So yeah, we definitely work for them.
Okay. Is there any students who have any questions? Put it this way, I know I'm a teacher, lecturer myself. I've been presenting to students all year, and nobody has asked me any questions, but by and large they all pass their exams and things out there. So I know from the student's point of view, and I have a 17, 18-year-old children myself, they do listen, they do absorb, and part of the reason that we are recording this is that you can go back and look at it again. There's so much information in this here that even I will have to watch it again to absorb it. So students, if you have any questions, fire them in the chat quickly, or come back to me, Tony Madden, after you're ready. This question for you there, Ben.
What is your recommendation into investments? Is that personally, or is that like in the sort of wider market? Just quickly, I mean, I would love to chat to you more about it separately, but I think, yeah, I mean, personally, back to Guy's point, I think, you know, get advice, right? Look at what other people are doing. There's some crazy advice out there, but I think start with the basics, you know. But if you're talking about investments as in, I don't know, a company or at a sort of in the technology world, then yeah, I think there's loads of great information out there. There's such a wide range of capital. So we go back to that slide about money, right? You know, wanting to take on money. There's just so many people that are offering to invest in businesses now. or individuals. So yeah, I think it's just to build a network, get to know people, ask them questions, be inquisitive, listen, and that goes on a personal level as well. Back to my comment about family and friends, have a look at what other people are doing. But yeah, I don't want to be sort of ticked off for offering advice. So yeah, would happily share things to read, etc. But you do need to be regulated to offer certain advice. So.
There's another good question there from Alicia.
Yeah, love that question. Guy, do you want to, or Ellie, do you want to start? And I'm happy to give my views as well.
Yeah, I think I would answer that. From my impression, I'm just trying to be positive. I'd really like to see some global trends involving trying to combat climate change and global warming to be some of the trends that focus on local economies. It's been moving pretty slowly recently, and I don't know how realistic it is me saying that, but I just try and put some positive energy out there, and I just really hope that some of the trends are influenced by the fact that we need to do a bit better just globally for our environment. But then other than that, obviously, as we've seen in the past few years, anything to do with virtual working, virtual learning, virtual stuff like that, I think will definitely encourage the economy.
Yeah, sorry, I actually can't see the question because I'm screen sharing. But I'm happy to answer it if someone can let me know.
Sorry, Ellie. Yeah, no, that's right. You're completely right. Thanks. So the question was around which global trends do you think will shape the world economy in the next years?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess I would be similar to Guy. I think obviously like climate change has like massively come to the forefront of everyone's mind during I guess COVID and hopefully before that, but I think it's definitely got quite a bit of momentum now, you know, with the US kind of signing back into the treaty and stuff. And I think a lot of consumer-based brands, so a lot of brands that you and I would buy are having to kind of put sustainability at their core. Because they're realizing that people don't want to buy their products if they're not thinking about that. So I would say that's definitely one that I'm excited about. Because even, I mean, for example, ourselves, although we don't necessarily sell a product to you guys, we have to have kind of initiatives within the bank that kind of show that we're doing things ourselves to kind of move towards a sustainable and hopefully even carbon neutral in the future. So I think that's something that every company has to think about, regardless of what industry you're in. I'm especially excited about kind of the advance of electric cars as well. I think that'll be really cool for when they kind of get much more affordable for everyone, because they're still pretty expensive at the moment. But yeah, I think sustainability is a key one.
Yeah, no, that's really exciting. And then just very quickly, just because, you know, good question. What are the challenges you have to face when starting a business? So super quick. I think we talked about money and how do you grow the business. I think some of it, if you're literally starting off, is who's your first client, right? And so trying to find, typically people won't pay for your product or service up front, but you'll get someone to use the product and give you feedback and allow you to build on it and shape it before you then can hopefully properly go out to market and getting people to pay for it. So if anyone ever asks you to sort of try their product or solution or give feedback, you know, do carve out time for that, because I think as an entrepreneur, which it sounds like based on these questions you're all going to be, if you're starting a business, if you're starting something, you've got this really great idea, you just need to get feedback off people. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is who's going to be your first client and how do you actually take it from an idea to, wow, someone's willing to pay me X a month or whatever it might be.
Ben, if you're happy enough to keep answering questions, let's keep it going.
Yeah, I'm not. My next call is internal, so this is much more exciting. So because of the COVID-19, so I read this out, Ellie, because I know you can't see them. So because of the COVID-19 situation, the economy went down, and because of this, the risk, I think, increased of starting a new business. Yeah, I would agree with that. What risks should we avoid?
That's a good one, and I think it's kind of hard to answer kind of blanket. I'd say it kind of definitely depends on the type of business you're kind of looking to start up. I guess economies that have suffered specifically are like, you know, the travel sector. But then on the converse, things that have really flourished is obviously healthcare. You know, everyone realized during the COVID-19 pandemic that, you know, we need to accelerate healthcare and kind of put a bunch of money into it. But I guess if you're thinking generally about starting up a business, risks would be I guess you need to figure out who, as Ben said, your customer is going to be. If you don't kind of know who that's going to be, it will be pretty difficult to know how to target all of your selling. So just be very mindful of that. And then I guess risks also would be not having enough money to kind of properly fund everything you need to do. So just ensuring that, you know, you go out to investors or kind of friends and family, even at the beginning, if, you know, and pitch your idea to them, even if it's just for practice. So just making sure that you know kind of your business model and, you know, everything you want to accomplish kind of inside out.
Okay, a couple more questions there from Hussein.
Yeah, look at that question. So what do you think of Porsche's synthetic fuel? Do you think it will replace electric cars as it's meant to be cleaner, or do you think it won't work like Toyota's hydrogen fuel? So, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert in this, but from memory, I think this is going, is it next year? They said they're going to start like beginning trials. So I don't know if it's going to, again, linking back to my comment earlier, I don't know, is that going to be a paid trial? Will it be ready for consumers? I don't know. But Ellie or anyone else on the call, if you're more educated in this sector, please tell me.
Maybe not necessarily in the sector, but just from a more broad sense. I think for it to be successful, it obviously has to be able to compete in its market. And Tesla at the moment is dominating that kind of industry with their electric cars. So I feel like it's good that Porsche, a brand as big as Porsche, kind of has the backing of their own company. So in that sense, I think it could be quite successful. And yeah, I think it just depends on how well it's actually marketed. If it is generally cleaner, then I don't see any reason why it shouldn't succeed, because it seems like the best alternative. But obviously, it is priced way above. A Porsche in general is priced way above most people's incomes. I don't see how a version like this would be any cheaper. So it depends what you define as success.
Yeah, I think that's like the key point is on the whole kind of automotive industry is the price point. I feel like Guy touched on it there, but I think the reason like people haven't switched over to electric cars at the moment is they're still prohibitively pretty expensive. You can't really buy a secondhand decent electric car at the moment. And I think until that changes and the price becomes much more affordable for kind of everyone's household, it's going to be tough for things to switch over. And I don't know if that's the case for this kind of synthetic fuel, if it can be used on kind of everyone's car as it is. I imagine probably not. But I think that would be kind of the key point for that is, you know, is its price prohibitively expensive, or will people be able to kind of use it as a like for like to petrol, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. And I think also, and I don't know enough about synthetic, but I imagine it's also taken on the range challenge, right? So the thing with electric vehicles was, do I need to charge it to go to the end of the road and then quickly find somewhere to charge it again? And my general view is range now is like 330 miles a charge plus on most electric vehicles. So I don't think that's it. It's more the price point to Guy and Ellie's point. So if Porsche are looking to take on the range challenge, and a Porsche is a high-end car, I'm not quite sure where it will fit in. But I love questions like this because I'm learning just by listening as well. So yeah, I really, really appreciate you asking that. I think Tony's on mute.
Could I ask just a couple of very, very quick and rapid fire questions, because we're recording this. So, I'm just looking at sorry, Ben, take that question from Habil there instead of me.
Oh, wow. Okay. ExxonMobil and Repsol are also investing in e-fuels. Its downside is the production cost and the fact it isn't very energy efficient. Nice. So, I mean, yeah, I'd love to chat about it. I don't know if anyone wants to come off mute, probably not, but I'm loving these comments and it's great engagement. So yeah, again, it's not, I think it's the production cost. I mean, if you look at Tesla, they built an absolutely phenomenal sized factory, didn't they, to sort of own the product. I don't even know if it's complete yet in fully, but to own the production cost, and that's brought down the cost of their vehicles hugely. To allow them to compete on a consumer level. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has got any comments on that. If not, Tony, fire through some questions.
Well, I think Ellie actually mentioned there, it's a balancing thing. Even to produce, we're all supporting electric cars, but even to produce electric cars, you need to get lithium, and then you have to mine lithium.
Yeah.
So yeah. It's all a balancing act, you know. Just a very quick couple of questions here. Do you have to have a degree or to get into SVB, or do you accept apprenticeships, or 18? Can you come in at 18 years of age?
I think typically most people have a degree at SVB, but having said that, I do know that we're taking kind of school leavers more on kind of our client service side, but it's a great way to get in the company. You know, just because you start on maybe kind of a client service side doesn't mean you have to stay there. Like at SVB, really like to do kind of lateral movements so you can kind of move into different sectors throughout your career. But I'd say kind of the more traditional way would be coming in kind of post degree. But I think, yeah, there is kind of scope that we will probably be working a bit more on apprenticeships in the future.
I know a lot of companies that I work with are almost replacing the graduate thing with the 18-year-old now thing, which is very positive for young people coming out now that don't want to have £30,000 to £50,000 debt. Another question that Ellie actually mentioned earlier about supporting sustainability, and I know students are very big into sustainability. Do SVB invest or support green energy projects around the world?
Yeah, so I think we have a lot of our ESG kind of initiatives. I think you can find them on the SVB website. I haven't committed them all to memory, but I do know that kind of aside from our ESG initiatives, we have what's called a project finance team over in the US. And these guys basically focus on financing kind of solar power farms, wind farms for companies that do that. So it's kind of a debt product, but kind of focusing on those sustainable and green initiatives. But yeah, I believe because we've kind of gotten to a certain size, we kind of have to report on all of our ESG initiatives. So check out the SVB website. There's probably some more detail on that.
Okay. Just my last, and it's more a point than anything else. It just shows you the ridiculousness of sports stars. Whenever Ronaldo moved the bottle of Coke from the front of his desk at the press conference, Coca-Cola shares fell by 2.6 billion sterling. I mean, it just shows you the power that they actually have, these people, you know. So, just a point. Right.
So to interrupt you, Tony. I just wanted to pick up on that point around joining SVB, whether you need a degree or not. Something that we spoke about with the students that are with us at SVB this next few weeks was about the fact, and it's something that Gareth Southgate actually talked about before the game last night. Talent will kind of get you in the door, so to speak. But we look for people who have kind of a particular mindset, and I think that's very true of this whole kind of ecosystem that we've been talking about today. There's a certain amount of talent that everyone probably needs to kind of get into being an entrepreneur, but often it's the people who've got that kind of growth mindset, that grit, that determination. They're the ones that kind of go on to be successful.
Yeah. Just on that point, I work with an entrepreneur over here who makes pipettes and things for the medical industry, and he told me he worked as a BTEC, British Telecom engineer, for 10 years underneath his stairs, developing products without a penny. They never made a penny for 10 years, and then the market just came right from it, and now he's a multi-millionaire. So that stoicism and grit is exactly what you need to be an entrepreneur. Can I just say it's now almost 20 past 11. We still have about 29 students on the call, which is fantastic credit to students, and I'm so pleased that you're still here. On behalf of the students, can I personally thank Ellie and Ben and Guy and Richard for a fantastic presentation this morning. And I mean, I'm very excited about it, and I'm going to watch the recording as well, because I want to be a next gazillionaire myself, you know. So I'm very impressed by the performance this morning. I have a couple of students have contacted me personally to say, can I provide your details to them? But I will discuss that with you in an email, and then you can come back to me about that, whether you want to or whether it's suitable to contact them. You know. Any final questions from any of the students? I see we're getting some nice thank yous in from everybody there. No questions. That's okay.
No, I just want, sorry, can I just reiterate? I mean, to ask, and I know, and hopefully technology's embraced this, right? Because you no longer need to speak, you can put it in chat. But I generally was not necessarily expecting a lot of questions, and it makes it so much more enjoyable. And some of the questions I've never had before. So you're stretching us, you're thinking about it in just the right way, and there is no right or wrong way. You're actually thinking beyond it. You're thinking forward. So asking questions, it shows that attitude that Richard and Tony were talking about. So yeah, really appreciate all your help and support in making this sort of a successful session.
Can I just, sorry, I apologize for hogging, again directed at the students. A friend of mine who I know through canoeing circles, and he started a business selling t-shirts, and it bombed. He got a business printing t-shirts, and it bombed. And then he got a business selling little bits and pieces of jewelry, and it did quite well. So after 5 years, he had 38 stores. He now has one of the biggest water parks in the UK, and he was valued last year at having 78 million quid. So, and it just was sheer tenacity. And as Richard said, having that vision and never taking no for an answer. So yes, folks, students, thank you so much. Thank you, the teachers who directed your students to this here. I appreciate that. I'm a teacher myself. And the SVP, brilliant. Thanks so much. Okay.
Thanks, guys.
All right. All the best. Take care.
Thank you.
Richard,
Thank you.
I appreciate that, folks. All right. Bye-bye.